This is episode 22, our final chapter, where insight begins not with answers, but with observation. You shared this fascinating source with us titled E22-meditation.pdf, and today we're diving deep into its pages. This source, well, it explores a really personal journey, doesn't it? And offers a distinct perspective on understanding the mind, finding insight, particularly through meditation.
It really does. And our mission in this deep dive, specifically for you listening, is to pull out the core ideas from this material. We want to explore how this source suggests direct observation might be, a powerful path to knowledge, and how that contrasts with the usual ways we try to figure ourselves out, often through stories, ideologies, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the person described is quite critical of those stories. So
Yeah.
why turn to something seemingly so,
It's simple.
like watching your breath?
Exactly. That's the intriguing part we want to unpack.
Okay, so let's start with that personal story. The source paints a picture of the author as a troubled, restless teenager, really grappling with those huge questions, especially about suffering, and feeling pretty disillusioned.
Right. Disillusioned by what they saw as the traditional fictions, the big narratives, religious, nationalistic, romantic, even capitalist myths. They sensed these were just constructed stories, but, well, didn't know where else to look for something real.
So naturally, they turned to academia. Seems like a common path.
It is. And they found academia gave them these incredibly sharp tools for deconstruction, for pulling apart those very myths they were skeptical of.
Not the answers themselves.
Apparently not the satisfying answers to life's big personal questions anyway. Academia, the source suggests, encouraged really narrow focus, like their own path led them to study, I think it was medieval soldiers' autobiographical texts for a doctorate.
Wow, specific.
Very. And philosophy. It provided, as they put it, intellectual entertainment, but still not that real insight they were after. It sounds like the more they learned about things, the more the fundamental questions kind of lingered, unanswered.
Yeah, I can imagine that being frustrating. So after all this intellectual searching, the story takes a bit of a turn. A friend, Ron Maram, suggests trying a 10-day Vipassana meditation course.
And the reaction? Pure skepticism initially. Dismiss it as New Age mumbo-jumbo.
Understandable, maybe, after years in rigorous academic setting.
Totally. But Ron persisted, apparently, and after about a year, they finally went. This is April 2000, and what seems to have really struck them was the sheer practicality of it all. The teaching from S.N. Goenka.
Practicality, how so?
Well, forget deep theories for a second. The core instruction was just incredibly simple. Sit down, close your eyes, and just observe your breath.
Just watch it. Coming in, going out through the nostrils.
Exactly. And crucially, don't do anything to it. Don't try to control it. Don't breathe specially. Just observe the reality of the present moment, whatever it may be.
And the author says this simple instruction: it was the most important thing anybody ever told me. That's a huge statement for just watching your breath.
It is, isn't it? I think the source suggests it's because it immediately shifts your focus away from thinking about things or looking outside and straight into your direct internal reality.
Okay.
Like the source talks about how we often ask these big abstract questions like, what happens after death?
Right, assuming there's some I that continues.
Exactly. But this perspective flips it. It suggests the real mystery, the real puzzle, isn't what happens after death. It's what's happening right now, before it.
What's happening before death? Okay, unpack that a bit. What's the angle there?
Well, the source argues, look, if you just observe yourself, your body, your brain, your mind, what do you see?
Thoughts coming and going, feelings changing.
Constant change, right. The source says nothing endures, not even from one moment to the next. Your body's changing, thoughts flow, feelings shift. So if everything's in flux, what actually holds this thing we call life or ourselves together moment to moment?
Right.
If you can't even grasp that ongoing process, the source implies, how can you possibly understand death, which is just the end of that process?
And so the idea of an unchanging soul that lasts forever.
The source is pretty blunt there, calls it just a story. The challenge is, can you observe a soul directly?
Right.
So the argument is, understanding this constant moment-to-moment change by watching it happen, even just in the space of one breath, gives you a real tangible insight into existence. And that, in turn, sheds light on death. It grounds the big question in something you can actually experience.
Okay, so they start this practice, observing the breath. But the first big takeaway wasn't some cosmic insight.
No, quite the opposite, apparently. It was a really stark, humbling realization about their own mind.
Which was?
How little they actually knew about it, and, more importantly, how little control they had. The task was simple. just observe the breath. But they found their mind would just wander off after
Yeah.
maybe 10 seconds.
Wow. Just 10 seconds.
Yeah, they describe it vividly, thinking they were the CEO of their mental world, in charge,
Hmm.
only to discover through this simple exercise they were barely the gatekeepers. Just trying to watch the entrance, the nostrils, and couldn't even stay there.
That must have been eye-opening, as they called it, shattering some assumptions.
Definitely. A real wake-up call about self-perception and control.
Did the practice stay just with the breath then?
No, it expanded from there. They learned to observe ordinary bodily sensations across the whole body. Things like heat, pressure, maybe tingling, or even pain.
Not trying to find bliss or anything special.
Exactly. The emphasis in Goenka's teaching, as described here, wasn't about chasing pleasant states. It was about observing reality as it is, manifesting in the body, however mundane or even uncomfortable it might be.
And observing these mundane sensations, what did that lead to? What was the insight?
This was pretty critical, according to this source. The insight was that the flow in the mind, our thoughts, emotions, is deeply, intimately linked to these body sensations.
Linked how?
The idea proposed is that we don't actually react directly to an external event, like someone's comment or a news headline or even a memory popping up. Instead, we react to the physical sensations that event triggers within our own bodies.
Okay, can you give an example?
Sure. The source uses anger. You feel insulted. But the experience isn't just the thought, I've been insulted. It's felt physically. The author describes it as burning sensations in the pit of my stomach and the band of pain that grips my heart. It's your body that feels the hurt.
That's a powerful description. And the point is, we usually don't notice that physical aspect.
Right. The author notes, they'd been angry thousands of times, but they'd always focused outward on the person who caused it, the injustice, the situation. They'd never systematically observed how the anger actually felt physically inside their own skin.
So just shifting the focus inward to the sensation itself.
That, the source claims, provided more insight into themselves and human nature in those 10 days than their whole life before that. And importantly, this understanding came not from adopting a belief system, but just from careful, sustained observation of reality as it presented itself.
Okay, so if we react to sensations, and sensations are constantly changing, where does suffering come from in this model? It's not just the external event causing it.
Not directly, no. The conclusion drawn from this observation is that the deepest source of our suffering isn't the external world, it's the patterns of our own mind.
Our reactions.
Exactly. Suffering is framed here as a mental reaction. Your mind craves something pleasant and it's not there, or it dislikes something unpleasant and it is there. The mind reacts to this mismatch between desire and reality by generating, unpleasant mental states and physical sensations.
Yeah.
That feeling is the suffering.
So suffering is generated internally as a reaction.
That's the idea. It's not an objective condition imposed from outside, but a habit pattern of the mind. And understanding that, seeing that pattern in yourself, is presented as the crucial first step toward stopping yourself from creating more suffering.
And this isn't something you just realize once and you're done. The source mentions ongoing practice.
Yes, definitely. The commitment described is significant 2 hours of meditation daily, plus periodic longer retreats. And the author stresses this isn't about escaping from the world, it's the opposite. It's about getting in touch with reality on a much deeper, more direct level than just thinking about it allows.
And they felt this practice was actually helpful for their other work, like writing.
Very much so. It's even credited with providing the mental clarity needed to write huge, complex works like Sapiens and Homo Deus. So the argument is that meditation, when practiced this way objectively, as observation becomes a really valuable tool. A tool for understanding the human mind that complements, the more external methods of science.
Okay, that's a great transition. This idea of meditation as a potential tool for scientific understanding of the mind. The source suggests science kind of struggles here. Why is that?
Well, partly it's about the tools. We don't have perhaps the most efficient tools specifically for the mind itself. And partly, maybe more fundamentally, we often tend to confuse the mind with the brain.
The mind-brain distinction. How does the source define them?
It makes it pretty clear. The brain is the physical stuff, neurons, chemicals, electricity zipping around, it's material. The mind, though, is subjective experience. The actual feeling of pain, the experience of seeing red, the sensation of love, the flow of thoughts themselves, what it's like to be you.
And science assumes the brain creates the mind, but
But as the source points out, at least as of 2018, when it seems this was written, we have absolutely no explanation for how. How does electrochemical activity in the brain give rise to the feeling of sadness or the taste of chocolate?
The hard problem of consciousness.
Exactly. There's still a huge mystery there. So, studying the mind, the realm of subjective experience, is necessarily distinct from just studying the physical brain, at least with our current tools and understanding.
And brain scanners, EEGs, those things. They show us the brain activity, but not the subjective feeling itself.
Precisely. They show correlations. This part of the brain lights up when someone says they feel fear. But the scientist running the scanner isn't feeling the fear, they're observing the physical correlate.
Which leads back to the problem of relying on people's reports about their own minds. Secondhand information.
Yes, the source makes a crucial point. The only mind you ever have direct, immediate access to is your own, right now. To understand anyone else's mind, you rely on what they tell you or how they act. And those reports, well, they're always filtered, potentially distorted, incomplete.
Psychology uses statistics on lots of reports, which helps.
It helps immensely, absolutely. It identifies patterns, develops therapies, but it's still fundamentally working with indirect data when it comes to subjective experience itself.
The source uses that analogy about studying Samoan culture.
Yeah, I like that one. You can read every book ever written about Samoa, gather all the reports, you'll learn a lot. But to really understand the culture deeply, the source argues, you gotta go there, immerse yourself, observe directly.
But even going there isn't enough if you just wander around.
Right. You need systematic methods, like an anthropologist uses in the field. Careful observation, structured interviews, ways to try and mitigate your own biases and assumptions. Otherwise, you just project your own stuff onto what you see.
Okay, so applying that analogy back to the mind. Observing your own mind objectively sounds even harder than observing a foreign culture.
It arguably is. Anthropology has had a century or more to develop its methods for observing others. But when it comes to systematic, objective self-observation of our own subjective experience, the source suggests modern science is still, relatively speaking, just getting started.
And this is where, maybe, some older traditions come back into the picture.
That's the connection the source makes. It suggests that various ancient cultures, maybe because they didn't have fMRI machines, devoted a lot more attention to the inner world. And they developed sophisticated, systematic methods for observing the mind directly from the inside. Often, these get lumped together under the term meditation.
But the source is careful to frame meditation here primarily as a technique, right? Not necessarily religious.
Yes, that's a really key distinction in this perspective. It's presented as a practical method for the direct observation of your own mind. Sure, religions have widely used these techniques for their own goals, integrating them into their belief systems. But the source argues that doesn't make the underlying technique inherently religious.
Like using books. Religions use books, but reading isn't inherently religious.
Exactly that analogy. It's a tool, a method that can be used in different contexts.
And the specific Vipassana technique taught by Goenka, the one the author learned,
it's presented as being extremely practical, very focused on the doing, the actual experience, rather than getting bogged down in philosophy or dogma. While it has roots in ancient India, potentially with the Buddha, the instruction was clear. Put aside the theories, put aside beliefs, and just focus on your direct experience, moment by moment.
They even had a sign at the door, apparently.
Yeah, something like, please avoid theoretical discussions. Focus on matters related to your actual practice. Keep it grounded in what you're actually observing.
And that actual practice is methodical, continuous, objective.
That's the aim. A systematic way to watch body sensations. Notice the subtle mental reactions that bubble up in response to them, and start identifying the underlying patterns of the mind. Again, the goal isn't presented as seeking out special experiences or cosmic bliss, but simply understanding the reality of your mind as it operates, even in its most ordinary moments.
You mentioned earlier that science is interested in meditation now, but maybe using it differently.
That's the critique, or perhaps the observation, made in the source. Much current research involves bringing skilled meditators into the lab and scanning their brains while they meditate.
Studying the brain of the meditator.
Right. Which is valuable, of course. But the source uses that analogy. It's like having a powerful microscope. Meditation, the tool for observing subjective reality directly. But instead of using the microscope to look through it at the subject, the mind, you use your old magnifying glass, external scientific tools, to look at the microscope itself, the meditating brain.
So you're studying the tool, or the brain using the tool, rather than using the tool for its intended purpose, direct observation of the mind.
That's the essence of the analogy, yeah. You're learning about the brain correlates, but maybe missing the direct experiential data the technique itself could offer if used as a primary research method by the scientists themselves.
But the source isn't dismissing brain research at all.
Oh, absolutely not. It's very clear this is about complementing, not replacing. Think of it like digging a tunnel through a mountain. Brain science digs from one side with its tools, studying the material brain. Direct mind observation, using techniques like meditation, digs from the other side, exploring subjective experience.
And maybe they'll meet in the middle?
That's the hope or the hypothesis. If mind and brain are ultimately two aspects of the same thing, the tunnels should eventually meet. But the source implies, even if they don't, or if the connection is super complex, digging from the mind side, the subjective side, is crucial for a full picture. You can't just ignore half the mountain.
But using meditation like this as a rigorous observation tool for yourself, it sounds incredibly demanding.
The source is upfront about that. It takes extraordinary investment and tremendous amount of discipline. The mind is described as inherently wild and impatient. Just trying to keep your attention objectively focused, even for a few seconds, is surprisingly difficult, especially when you start.
It's not like picking up a microscope that's ready to go, or fixing a broken handle if it stops working.
Exactly. If your mental focus wanders, you can't just tighten a screw. It requires ongoing training, cultivating the skill of observation itself.
And shortcuts don't really work for exploring the mind itself.
The source warns against things like pills, or even just exciting distractions like thrillers. They might narrow your focus temporarily, make you concentrate, but that kind of narrow, externally driven focus prevents you from actually observing the mind's own natural dynamics, the wandering, the arising of thoughts, the reactions. A thriller grips your attention, but it's focused outward on the story, not inward on the process of your own attention and feeling.
So what's the ultimate payoff for putting in this kind of demanding effort? Why bother?
Well, the source kind of draws a parallel. Look at the incredible effort anthropologists put in to understand remote cultures, or zoologists tracking elusive animals, or astronauts going to space. People dedicate years, face hardships, spend fortunes to understand things out there. The argument is, shouldn't we be willing to invest similar effort to understand our own minds?
Which are arguably the most important things for us to understand.
Right. They shape our entire experience of reality, and the source adds this little kicker at the end. It's especially important to understand our own minds now, before the algorithms make our minds up for us.
Ooh, that's a thought. Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive then, we've traced this fascinating perspective from the source, moving away from relying solely on external stories or analysis, toward finding potentially profound insights through direct internal observation.
Yeah, it really presents a strong case that methodical observation, even of something as simple as the breath, or just feeling the heat in your hand, isn't just some niche spiritual thing. It can be a practical, powerful tool for understanding reality, the nature of the mind, the self, as it actually is, in a way that can potentially complement our existing scientific methods.
It's quite a compelling argument, but it also highlights how difficult that objective self-observation is. It requires serious discipline, serious effort. And when you think about all the external forces constantly pulling at our attention, shaping our thoughts, our desires,
Yeah.
it leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What really is the true cost for us as individuals, maybe even for society, of not making that difficult effort to genuinely understand our own minds?